U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action commissioned a report called Potential for U.S. Agriculture to be Greenhouse Gas Negative, which was authored by an independent group of 26 leading research scientists and peer reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. This report, which was published by the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, or CAST, is a literature review. We will include a link in the description for you to learn more. In the report, it features 5 different opportunities, and we will be covering each opportunity individually with one of the many authors involved in the study. Today, our focus is on nitrogen fertilizer management. We are joined with one of the many authors involved in the study and provided valuable impact on this opportunity. His name is Dr. Bruno Basso. He's a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Michigan State University. Well, Bruno, from a high level overview, can you share your involvement on this opportunity focused on nitrogen fertilizer management?
Surely. So the chapter that I co-author with Phil Robertson is the one that deals with a very important challenge in agriculture, which is nitrogen management. Everybody in the agricultural field knows the importance of nitrogen for plant nutrient that allows to create compounds and protein. And at the same time, the complexity in managing nitrogen, it's related to the fact that there are unavoidable negative trade-offs. And one of these aspects, again, is the losses of gases, one very powerful nitrous oxide that is emitted in response to the excess amount of fertilizer that is applied, or the losses of nitrogen through deep percolation, nitrate leaching. So while nitrogen is so fundamental to plants, at the same time has this complexity of managing the losses. And so the goal of optimizing nitrogen use, it's a lingering problem that scientists and farmers trying to manage over the last 30 years.
Right. And we're going to dive deeper into that today. And one thing that's been unique about these episodes is we're talking with the authors that helped put this report together. So I want to read a piece from the report. It says, understanding the nitrogen cycle and the factors affecting nitrous oxide emissions provides a basis for quantifying the potential opportunities. Can you kind of get a little basic with us, Bruno, and share what the nitrogen cycle is and the qualifying or the quantifying opportunities?
Yes. So without necessarily going in the complexity of the nitrogen cycle, in simple words, nitrogen in the soil is the master of managing, this complexity of nitrogen available to the plants and potentially be lost. So nitrogen is present in the atmosphere in a 78%, but the amount of nitrogen that comes directly from the atmosphere to the plants is still relatively small. Only 10 pounds comes directly from the atmosphere. The rest has to be either produced in the soil from decomposition of organic matter. So the previous residues, the roots from the previous crops. And so that's one component of managing both carbon and nitrogen at the same time. You have to have enough nitrogen such that the carbon can be decomposed, and so additional nitrates are released as part of this cycles, going from organic to nitrification, then to mineralization, because plants are kind of picky. They can't use organic nitrogen as it is. It has to be nitrified and mineralized. And so these processes that occur in the soil reach a level when the ultimate gas through denitrification, which is the reverse process of going back, it's the gas is released back to the atmosphere. So it's either the composition of organic matter, very important and useful. And so the paradox is we always want to have organic matter that brings all these positive impacts, builds or aggregates and stores water, but that releases nitrogen. At the same time, this nitrogen may not be directly available immediately when the plants need it. And that's when fertilizer really come handy. Whenever the plants, a corn crop, for example, is very eager to get nitrogen fertilizer to build the rest of the growth of the crop in the middle of the season, then fertilizer is added, but it could be added at a time where, again, the need from the plants, supply and demand are not always matched. And, there could be a big, rainfall event that flushes some of this nitrogen down to the lower layers, all the way down to the bottom of the layer, and can be lost for nitrate leaching. So again, this complexity all deals around how much nitrogen is available to the roots, to the plants, and it's produced by, as we said, very small amount atmosphere, decomposition of organic matter, or fertilizer. Fertilizer is still relatively cheap, and farmers realize that plants need it. Without the additional fertilizer, we wouldn't be able to have the level of yields that we have. And so they add fertilizer, but that comes at a price of, again, losses through gases from greenhouse gas emissions, nitrous oxide, or losses through water quality through nitrates.
Before we talk about some of the emerging technologies, some of the items that I'm thinking that you're talking about with nitrogen, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, legume credits, cover crops. What are some of those practices that are in place to help with nitrogen fertilizer management?
Right. So farmers are becoming, much, much more aware of the opportunities that they can really, what's in their toolbox. And what you mentioned, first, the opportunity of not tilling the soil and keeping no tillage, and the opportunity to grow a cover crops. These are all beneficial practices, what we would call from regenerative practices. They build organic matter. They have these large co-benefits of improving soil health. Again, because they have nitrogen, that's still an immediate connection with some of these losses of nitrous oxide. One aspect that our research has shown over the years is that not all the fields are the same. There are parts of the fields that they're much in a better position to use water and use nitrates along with water. Other parts of the field that they have more of a shallow soils or different type of texture, lower organic matter to start with, don't have the same potential capacity to do that. So one other tool is differentiating, applying different amount of nitrogen over space and matching when is the best time to apply it. So digital agriculture or precision agriculture is another, critical piece of nitrogen management, because it allows to match the supply and demand in areas where they're much more, tailored to that particular location.
I'm glad you brought that up, Bruno, because sometimes we talk about across the United States and how different our climate and our landscape is, but from field to field, from square footage of that field, there's so much
Correct.
variability that can be happening in those farms or in those fields. Now, what emerging technologies are available in the space of nitrogen management? You mentioned precision agriculture. Is there any specific items you want to talk about with precision agriculture or other technologies?
So precision agriculture is still a broader term. It's easy to say, okay, you're going to put the right amount and you're good with it. We've been trying to do that for a long time. And sometimes it's important to understand that areas, for example, there is something that I've really been putting this word out, that it's almost counterintuitive, where parts of the fields that they're low productivities over time, the immediate response to that, it would say, let's put more nitrogen over these low productivity areas. But if studies, as technologies allow us to show through the yield mapping, have really shown that these areas cannot produce, over the last 10 years, and only produce 130, 140 bushels of corn, which is on the low side. It shouldn't be managed with the same amount of fertilizer that the same field in another part where you put 200 pounds give you 250 bushels. So there is a dynamic understanding of this situation, and we came to a conclusion that these low productivity areas should be the one that should be receiving less nitrogen. So that's one aspect that for a farmer is not necessarily, it's again counterintuitive, because they tend to put more where things don't look as necessarily as good. That's part of the complexity of the system, because nitrogen alone, it just is not taken up as it really is. It needs water, it needs other, part of the system. And so it may be related to shallow soils, number of plants that are lower. And so that's one aspect of precision agriculture one of the products that we developed here in Michigan State is this yield stability analysis, where it shows area that they're constantly underperforming versus areas that they have high productivity, and you can manage nitrogen accordingly. So in season, matching supply and demand also is important, because each single year is different. And again, how is it different? It can be different in relation to how hot it is and how much decomposition is occurring, but also how much available water there is. And so using system models that help you almost predict ahead of time how much water and how much nitrogen you already have in the soil could help farmers make a better decision. So through this system that now we call digital twins, and they allow to help farmers make a decision based on the best possible estimates of what is already available, what mineralization, how much nitrogen is there. So that's within precision agriculture. I guess other technologies that have been on the market haven't necessarily shown to be perfect everywhere. They work in some places and not in other, are the addition of nitrogen biostimulants or, microbial produced from microbes. So with very little chemical synthesis of, fossil fuels burning. So really very low emissions. And so applying this microbial fertilizer in different parts of the fields will basically help reduce the amount of chemical fertilizer of synthesis that would come with this negative label of having N2O. It's not that these fertilizers do not necessarily have the immediate, you can still have losses of N2O even if you add this, but significantly lower, because it makes nitrogen available possibly close to the roots, and plants can take it up and be more efficient. Another technology is the post-harvest management. So be able to have, a soil that is covered with vegetation allows these excess nitrates to be taken up by the plants and storing in the roots, in the biomass, which builds what we said originally, these regenerative practices. Anything that uses, the available nitrogen reduces the emissions. And that's really the core of the chapter that we presented. We show the complexity, we show the negative trade-offs of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's all around how you manage the available nitrogen. Off season, you want to use it. In season, you want to make it available to the plants. Right time, right place.
Right. I like that you emphasize complexity, because there is a lot of complexity, but each farmer can put together a plan that works best for them, because everyone is going to be different. I want to read a portion from the report. It says Bruno and his team demonstrated every field produces crops differently and exhibits a consistent response to the amount of nitrogen applied. This level of uncertainty and the inability to accurately predict weather conditions throughout the year often results in over application, something we just talked about. How can we address this challenge?
So as I mentioned just a few seconds ago, the over application, it's still a mentality approach. In a sense, I need to protect myself as a farmer to be able to guarantee that my plants will have sufficient amount. So it's some level of paranoia of, be able to do that. Now, data is, again, we're showing that's a very sensitive, important components in areas where the productivity is there and the plants will do need nitrogen. But there are other parts that may not need as much. So that goes back to applying the right amount over, the different places. And the weather uncertainties, it's so critical because with weather, it's mainly the rainfall pattern, the amount of water that is available to the crop. And so understanding the historical performance brings a perspective that farmers seldom really put together. If it is a dry year and you have had, knowledge that the dry years plants cannot use as much fertilizer. So waiting to see as much as possible how the type of weather that you're getting then will allow you to reduce the risk, because if you have a smaller crop, you know that that crop is going to be needing potentially less nitrogen. This is for fields and areas across the US that do come in later in the season, the in-season application, at side dressing. Unfortunately, there is still a majority of farmers that for various reasons, availability of fertilizer, complexity of their operations, very large size, pricing, buying the fertilizer all at once, avoiding storages. And so there are logistical complexity even in that. They put fertilizer all at once, sometimes in the fall, sometimes all in the spring. Unfortunately, with that, you automatically wash away the opportunity of waiting to know what type of weather you're getting, such that you can optimize this use, because it's expensive. It's still, something that you paid for. You want to fertilize the plains and not the rivers. So that's where it goes. And in order for them to make sure that some of the leaching it's washed down, they tend to put more. So it's a very well understood dynamics of approaches, but it's difficult for them to adapt and to change because of many, many other reasons, that makes the farming so complex. Just the last thing I wanted to add is that economics, it's at the bottom line of all this. Too often we were so surprised that farmers do not necessarily know the economics within each of fields. So they have large ideas but because large farms, they're again, numerous fields, you don't know, when you're planting one field, you have another 50 fields to plant and that kind of thing. It's really not to that level of knowledge of parts of the fields constantly lose money. And that's, to me, is going to be a breakthrough for them to accept that a better economics in farming comes from less expenses and not necessarily from greater yields. And unfortunately, farmers manage for yield. They don't manage for profit. They would argue against me, but they still do the same mistakes over and over. They don't manage for basically reducing expenses. No one reduces fertilizer because of this complexity. And I fully understand. When I give this advice, I have zero skin in the game. They take the risk. And that's where I finish this by saying farmers need to be rewarded for protecting the environment, because if they put their economics at risk, then they need to be rewarded, whether it's a policy from taxpayers. We want clean water. We got to help them manage the fields properly so that they don't have this economic hit by reducing, because you could have, again, put less fertilizer, you could have lower yields. But if you lead to a better ecosystem services, then the delta that they were missing comes from taxpayers or the markets. Companies, they're willing to pay extra amount of money, as they should. They often just mention about the willingness to do, but in the end, farmers are always the last one to be treated well.
Right. All of these practices have to be economically sustainable. We have to be compensating our farmers because, like you said, they are taking a big risk when they already have a lot of uncertainties, like Mother Nature, the weather, and the things that they're handling. So, thank you for bringing that up and wrapping it all together. I'd like to focus in on another part of the report talking about rice production. I'm going to read a portion. It says, in cultivated agriculture, rice production is one of the largest areas of methane emissions. The solution represents the linkage among all aspects of production management. What are some of the potential solutions for this?
So rice is an interesting thing because now we're bringing a different gas, into the mechanisms. That occurs because, as we all know, rice are irrigated through flooding. So when rice fields are flooded, oxygen is depleted, and soil, basically the microbes in the soil consume this oxygen. And there is a group of microbial family, the archaea, that they are methanogenic. So they basically, in absence of oxygen, these microbes break down the organic matter and they release basically methane. Now, methane is released through, water from bubbling of the water, but it's mostly lost through the plant itself, through, the rice plant parenchyma. So that's the major pathways. How do we do that? There is very little, there are opportunities that we can do. Wet and drying, so basically avoiding this longer time of oxygen depletion. So be able to bring oxygen back, so the methanogenic microbial will basically won't be as active. The addition of a large amount of manure or organic matter brings this organic matter in rice fields. Unfortunately, that immediately, the higher the organic matter in rice, the higher the methane emissions there are. Then some types of rice cultivars, they're working through that these mechanisms of having methane going through the plants is a little bit reduced, and biochar application builds more structures and ties things together, so there is a reduction of losses of methane. So these are some of the things, but again, it's a natural, mechanisms, because we flood, the fields. One group of bacteria predominates, or microbes predominate, and the alternatives are these management strategies. But it's a small percentage in terms of, the global anthropogenic from agriculture. Unfortunately, nitrous oxide with fertilizer is a significantly greater contributor to greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. But rice is certainly a problem through methane emission.
I'd like to open the door now to other challenges farmers and ranchers face in this space. What are some other challenges?
I think that I must say, the biggest source of risk, without going into the economic inputs of be able to have the supply chain ready, it always boils down to weather, climate variability, the uncertainties, too wet, too dry, wet in the beginning, drier in the season, wet on a, depression, dry on a hilltop, opposite situation, basically a month later. So how are you going to do this? Well, it is almost hard to believe, but science has got these mechanisms at least understood through the feedback and by looking at historical performances. And so we capture this complexity through models. Now, it's very important to understand farmers should never run models, but they can get advices on saying the probability of you getting a yield of this much when you planted under an unfavorable conditions and you had to postpone, your planting 2 weeks later, the knowledge of the reduction of yields actually impacts the nitrogen management because you're going to have a smaller crop. Unfortunately, many farmers play by calendar. Everything is basically on an automatic things. And so they don't adjust. They don't adapt to some of the, not all of them. Obviously, some are on top of things. So climate is obviously the biggest challenge. It's beyond my expertise, but, the topics of how the trades and the final use, what really farmers are really tied to grow corn and soybeans, but there are opportunities in alternative crops, and they're seldom brought into discussion because there isn't a market. So what would it take to create a market that would allow to basically avoiding putting all the eggs in one basket and favor what we know agronomically, crop rotations, be able to diversify, avoiding diseases, and bring the diversity that insects and pollinators and the whole system. So the complexity and the challenges also changes the status quo, be able to get comfortable in doing this thing. And in the end, what they force that under this type of management, corn and soybeans, it becomes get bigger or get out, because the cost of a machine is over $1 million. And what do you want to do? You want to get as much land as possible, such that your amortization rates goes down, the more acreage. Then there is the challenge of rental. 67% of the US land is rented. So some farmers may have less interest in doing some regenerative practices that will build a better system. This is very much like a human dimension. I mean, it's like we eat well or we exercise because we want to feel well. We want to do better over time. We want to age well. And we want to continue to produce food in the best possible way. When you don't have an interest, or you know your lease is going to be up next year, it's like you will never paint an apartment inside when you know your lease is going to be up in 6 months. So there is that level of complexity, even in how these farmers would assure to compete against other farmers to be able to get the land that they need to be able to do proper, maintaining this complexity in the financial. They have, millions of dollars at stake when they do the budget, even though the margin is very, very thin. So the economic challenges is very, very serious.
Yeah, and we will not end on this note, but I appreciate you
No,
bringing
no,
those challenges.
exactly not. I got
So
some possibly positive news to end up with.
good. So we have two more questions for you, Bruno. What needs to be done to make this successful?
Like I said, farmers have to be much more involved in conversation when decisions are made. But they also themselves have to have a self evaluation and to say, I need to be willing to change some of my, system, because the climate that is variable is well accepted by everybody. You get excessive amount of rainfall and drought in the same year. You can't put your egg all in the same basket. Diversifying your cropping system to me is key. Creating markets for alternative crops is key. So incentivizing through policy, through markets, this level of conversation, we need, look what happened during, the COVID, the supply chain completely broke. So we have to use all these experiences in building better supply chains, building, food that is produced in a more sustainable way. Also with our own, reducing the amount of agrochemicals that they use. Not that because they cost money, but a limited can be reduced because you're building better soil health. You have, a natural way of healing, the spores, killing things. And so they have to be at the center of the conversation. They have to be heard. They have to be rewarded, but they also have to be willing to be part of the solution through some level of change. So everybody has to basically give something and be able to have this conversation all together. Things from above will never work just in one way. Has to be a mutual. And they have to trust in the science that some solutions will unfortunately take. Agriculture is not a bench that you have in other type of sciences. You have an answer, in a few weeks you're able to do, sequencing or all the other stuff. For us, it takes years to see the results of no tillage with cover crops that build soil health. Takes at least 5 years. But in the meantime, it costs them more money to do it. And so some of them quit beforehand. That's a big mistake, because if you can't solve the problem with the system that got you into the problem in the first place. So you have to stick with the change that is much more longer term, but you have to have this buffer that cannot come from the sales, from the previous system, has to come from someone that rewards the risk. They understand that to change requires some level of protection to the people that produce our food.
Right. We need to be patient, control the controllables. Don't let the anxiety get too high, because there is a lot on our plate, but there are different ways that we can be navigating this landscape together. Last
Correct.
last question for you, Bruno. What do you want, and feel free to wrap this up with any items you've already said or anything new you'd like to mention. What do you want people to take away from this opportunity focused on nitrogen fertilizer management?
So nitrogen management can certainly be improved. There is technology that allows you to make the right decision on when to apply and where to apply in the quantity that the plants need. That goes under the umbrella of precision agriculture. So I would advocate farmers of a certain size of farms to be able to take that more seriously and apply nitrogen where is needed differently than where is not needed, and be willing to reduce expenses. If you that perfect year for the zone that never really gave you a yield, if it hasn't come, it's not gonna come now. You know what I mean? You manage for the perfect year for that zones. If for 10 years, you haven't got what you wanted out of that area, reduce expenses, which means reduce anything that you're investing in that area, all to the point of removing that area altogether for an alternative land use. You can be rewarded for ecosystem services for pollinators, for example, for flowers, for birds, and they will pay. There is ecosystem services. So precision agriculture holds a tremendous potential for managing, fertilizer. Understanding the climate and soil interaction of that particular farm requires this system. So engaging in conversation and attending meetings that they don't necessarily tell them how to farm, but they give them information on how they basically can use some of this technology, better. Those are things. But ultimately, I want to say that sometimes farmers again, they have to produce the economic. It's the long-term decision. It's the most complex things. In order to see the results, it may take a long time. And they need to push for saying, I'm willing to change, but I would like to have a support that takes me to the finish line of these 5 years. So walk with me on this change. Don't let me alone on the change, because they will go back. So that's not necessarily just them, but they need to realize that agriculture it's a long-term impact. It takes time to see the results of the benefits of practices. Cover crop 1 year or improve that doesn't do anything immediately tangible, but it takes time to see. So the understanding of the complexity and the long-term spatial and temporal variation, and that there are tools that can help them make better decisions. This, in a nutshell, is really how we should improve their management.
Right. And farmers are in a good position to do this. Most farms are generational, so they've learned from their grandparents, and now they're going to be passing it on to the next generation. So, no, it's going to take time, but you're going to have a great game plan in place. And I appreciate our conversation today with Dr. Bruno Basso, a good dose of reality. He's a professor of earth and environmental sciences at Michigan State University. We appreciate your time joining us on Farm Food Facts. U.S. Farmers and Ranchers plays a critical, important role of creating opportunities for collaboration, information sharing, and solution development for the full agricultural value chain. I highly recommend you check out the report called The Potential for U.S. Agriculture to be Greenhouse Gas Negative. We'll make sure that a link is included in the description below. We hope that you tune in again. I'm Joanna Guza for Farm Food Facts.